Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jar, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Last week, or the last episode, we talked about slaves that were taken from the Green Coast to Barbados and back to what is today Liberia. For today, we're going to focus on my home state, Georgia. From the Green Coast to Georgia and back again. This 12 ships left the Green Coast to Barbados over a period of 36 years. And guess how many ships returned? I'll keep that as your suspense. But we're going to be dealing with from the Green Coast to Georgia and back again. With me, as usual, we have our presenter, called Yeyia. Seku Salia Dukley called her Professor Call, and I think it's taking root now. So props.
I am not a professor. I haven't reached professor status, but I think it's a term of endearment from my brother Muhammad Salia Dukley. But yes, we have to get in the habit of calling people what they are. I'm just a student of history, and I enjoy it, and I like to share what I learn. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't need to
we can confer that on you. People getting doctorate is honorary professor, so just take it.
So the titles I have, trust me, I've earned them. I don't need any unearned accolades here. The ones that I have, I earned. So yes, it's we did Barbados, and then people started saying, well, were there other places that we were taking? Our cousins or our, forefathers were taken besides Barbados. And I said, oh, yes. And we actually did a whole episode on it, but we didn't really get into a lot of detail, which is called Slavery on the Grain Coast. So that is an episode if you want to really see the overall picture, what that looked like. That's a good point of reference. So just wanted to share that. But yeah, right. we have, today we're focused on Georgia and Liberia. So yeah. Dennis and I both reside in the great state of Georgia. So many of these people, their descendants are people we've probably seen, Dennis.
Yeah.
Especially me, because I love going to the Georgia Seacoast Islands, Jekyll Island, St. Simon Island. This is where a lot of our forefathers went. I'm always in Savannah, especially in the summertime when it's very, very hot and it feels like Cape Mesurado. That's when I like to be there. And it's a beautiful place. And I always see kinship in the people, in the Gullah Geechee people there. And just in general, I think they resemble us.
Right. And it's important, I don't know how to overemphasize this, that for a long time, we didn't know, it is not really popular in Liberia, that indeed what we know today as Liberia, they took people from there to slavery over a period of many years. And those people came right back. So my understanding, or what I've really in my subconscious, I don't know where I learned it from, is like they took slaves from all over Africa, and then when they were looking for a place, they found Liberia. But that link establishing that actually people came from Santa Cruz, they came from Cape Mount, they came from the Basel Cove and all that to go as slaves. And now they came back. I did not know that, and I believe many Liberians did not know that. So we learned it right here on the Liberia History Channel. So if you have not done so already, please share the show, invite someone, and let's get started with our topic for the day. Is to Georgia and back again, 12 ships, 36 years.
Yes, sir. 12 ships over 36 years. So I am looking at this. There's going to be a lot of pictures. We're going to have a lot of discussion. And I would like people to call in and kind of share their thoughts. I want this to be as interactive as possible. But yeah, we could go ahead and begin. The picture here, Dennis, is from a book.
And call before you even start. I want our viewers, because as we go through the slides today, the presentation, I want people to think about taking a trip to Georgia and look at some of these things that we're going to be talking about and see some of your cousins, right, that are still over there. that are Americans now. Not all of them went back. Some are still here. And so it's interesting that last week we did Barbados. Maybe it's too far to go to Barbados, but Georgia, hey, come on, and let's and check it out. I think it's going to be a very surreal feeling, and I want to have that feeling too. So at the end of the broadcast today, please promise me that you're going to make that trip to Georgia.
Absolutely. So we've got to Georgia and back again because we really always focus on the migration to Georgia, as Dennis had mentioned earlier. So before there was a migration to Liberia from Georgia and Savannah and all of these other places. But today we're focused specifically on people who went to, specifically we're focused on people who went to Savannah directly from within the boundaries of present day Liberia to Savannah. Very important because these are the ships that we have documented evidence of, 12 of them over a period of 36 years. These are the ships that we have a record of, 12 ships over a period of 36 years. These are the ships that we have a record of. So do we have any questions on that?
I don't know. I just wanted to sink in a little bit. 12 ships over a period of 36 years coming to Georgia, specifically Savannah. And
Yes,
as we learn many, many years later, people came from Savannah back to Liberia.
yes. Including the mother of President Tubman, who left Atlanta and went to Savannah and got on a ship and went to Maryland, and President Tubman's paternal grandfather was also from Georgia originally. Very interesting.
You can make this up. President Tubman is by far probably the most popular Liberian president.
Yeah, his parents were from Georgia, and there were people from Liberia or what became Liberia who were also enslaved in Georgia. And those are the people we are going to focus on today, their process, their journey. So now this does not mean that these are the only people. It doesn't mean that there were only 12 ships. What this means is that these 12 ships have records that survive until today. There were also ships that illegally took people from the coast after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished. That lasted until the 1860s, we know that. And there was transshipment points. So sometimes they would take people from the coast of what is now Liberia, and they would take them to Goree Island, where they would sit and wait for transshipment to a larger vessel to carry them to the West, the Caribbean, North America, Brazil, right? So we don't have record of them because the journey begins here, it ends at Goree, and we don't know where they went after that. They're just being held at Goree Island for transshipment across the Atlantic. These are vessels that were directly disembarked from our coast with people on board, enslaved people, the relatives of modern day Liberians, and then taken directly to Savannah, where they disembarked and were subsequently enslaved, sold into slavery.
And Goree Island is in present day Senegal.
Yes, but this is, I'm just bringing up Goree Island to let you know there were a lot of people who were
Right.
taken and transshipped through Goree, but we don't know where they ended up. Just to emphasize the fact that just because we have a record of 12 ships, it doesn't mean that these are the only 12 ships that arrived in Georgia with people from modern day Liberia, what became modern day Liberia, on board. But these are the ones that have surviving records.
Because as we learned from our last episode, there were some illegal shipment
Yes.
and some, of, and- wow.
So this is demonstrating all of the various ports along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast of the United States of America, where ships came from West Africa. So these are the ports of entry
Hmm.
for slave ships. And most of these ports of entry, most of them have direct shipments from Liberia to these places, from what is now Liberia to these places. I just wanted to show, because a lot of people, and the United States of America did not receive as many enslaved people as the Caribbean did, but the United States of America received a lot. And the other thing that many think is that American slave ships did not exist. What we're going to see with looking at this is a lot of these are, in fact, American slave ships.
Hmm. Oh wow! I'm just looking at those ports. I see Florida, St. Augustine, Florida, Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia,
Yes,
Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine. That entire coastline.
yes. Galveston, that little island of Galveston, Texas.
Yeah.
Galveston, Texas, actually, I mean, it's disturbing. It's very disturbing. And many of the people who left from Liberia, what became Liberia, were all up and down, were all up and down the coast here, as you
From
can see,
see
like around Charleston, the southeastern sea coast, because we were rice farmers, and that was one of the things we were valued for.
hmm, the rice we bind today. But anyway,
Hmm.
that's another story.
Yes, that is another story. It's a sad story, right? So with today, though, we're not focused on all those ports. Of course, today we are focused on just
Savannah,
Savannah.
Georgia.
Just Savannah. 12 ships in just Savannah, and these are the documented ships.
So
So
yeah,
over a period of 36 years, beginning the records begin in 1767, and they go all the way through 1803.
in 1767 you have the Dove. That's the vessel's name.
Yes.
From
So,
Bassa to Savannah, and the
yes.
captain that arrived at the first port is 51,
Hmm.
and that captain. Still the same year, Jenny came from the Windward Coast to
So
Savannah.
when they say place unspecified, typically that is the vicinity around Cape Meserado. Typically. So you might be looking at Marshall, but most likely you're looking at um, Town or Cape Meserado, or what they call Petite Meserado, which is also the the location of Providence Island right now.
So that's the place unspecified.
Yes, typically. So
So
that's
that
the Bird's Eye was the name of the ship. The captain's name was George Brown, good old Englishman. And then you have the Fly, which was again Windward Coast unspecified Alexander Taylor, who was an American captain. This one was an American vessel. You had the Sally from Grand Cape Mount, Savannah, where it landed, and then this had 350 people that arrived there on this one from Grand Cape Mount. And this was George Evans was the person that was there. And then we go on to the Eliza, arrived with 68 people. John Olderman, an American, was the name of the captain. You had the ship Diana, which arrived with 35 passengers. Isaac Gorham was the owner, or not the owner, but the captain of that vessel. You had the ship James, picked up I'm not sure from this slide how many people, but and then it arrived with 98 passengers. Edward Boss was the captain of that ship. The ship Abigail, Windward Coast, landed in Savannah with 64 enslaved people. So there are two captains of this ship, Caleb Green and Merritt Bates. And then you had the Engornia or Ingenoria, one of the two, was the name of this vessel. It picked up at Cape Mount, again, dropped off at Savannah. Stats unknown. Edward Boss, again, this is the captain. So he comes in with the ship James in 1795, returns in 1797 with another ship. So I don't know. These people
Mm.
were very much into this thing. Made a lot of money in trafficking human beings in the most horrific way. Some of this old money we see in Georgia. This is the source. Nabby on the
Mm.
Windward Coast, unspecified. This one, John Monroe. Just with Munro, I should say. And then you have the ship Laurel, which was the last vessel to have embarked from Cape Mount, last recorded vessel to go directly to Savannah. And that one, it was Henry Baldwin. Um, and that had 124 people. I need to emphasize that we talk about brain drain and human capital
Yeah.
flight. This is forced migration. Many of these people who were enslaved were in the prime of their lives. They were at either the very dawn of their lives, meaning they were at teenagers, very young adults, people who are the most useful and productive
Yeah.
for a nation's development, for a area's development. We're taking out in such great numbers from such a small area. And this is just one location,
Mm.
one location. So, we have to sometimes remember that these stats and these numbers are actual human beings with stories, with families, with parents, with siblings, sometimes with children,
Yeah.
and the abuses they endured.
People with aspirations, with dreams,
Absolutely.
being taken.
In the most horrific and frightening way. Violence. We like to use this word dehumanizing, and we sometimes use it in such a flippant way. So this is dehumanizing. We don't really know what it means to be dehumanized in the manner that these people were. Being forced to live in their own excrement and waste for long periods of time on a ship. And these are sail ships. Look at the dates. 1767. These were not steamships. These were sails. So imagine how rough those waters were.
Yeah. It's now from cargo to human beings.
Yes. So this is a publication that appeared in the Harper's Monthly. Actually, it should say Harper's Weekly in March 1854. Carrying cotton to the gin. This is Georgia. I found this interesting because we don't really see African Americans and most Caribbean people no longer carry loads on their heads this way. But in 1854, this was still common. Bless you. Sounds like you're getting a cold. I hope you feel better.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was very common still. And it's just, I mean, these women are carrying these loads on their head like women would do in such a crew or in Butuo, right? Or Zozo
Yeah.
or Robertsport. So this, or anywhere else in Africa for that matter. So I just found that interesting. We don't really see this happening anymore in North America, but this is what was still happening at this time because they weren't too far removed from the continent of Africa at this time. So this is just some basic stats about some of these ships, statistics. So if you look at the voyages database, each voyage has an ID. So this voyage ID is 24041. The vessel, we're going to look at the Dove. And the owner of the vessel was Miles Barber. And he was British. So this carried the British flag. And it was built in Liverpool in the year 1764. It was, however, registered at Lancaster in England. And it was also registered in 1764. The type of vessel was a sloop. It's a type of ship. The tonnage was not available. None of these other stats were available. I'm sure it had guns mounted, but we don't have the data on it because all of these vessels were heavily armed. We can go to the next slide. So an enslaved family, and this is in Georgia. I mean, the baskets of cotton. One thing I found interesting is that these baskets were made by the enslaved people themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't even have the decency to give them the tools that they needed, right? So these cotton fields are still visible in Georgia. Some of them have been turned into fancy subdivisions all around here. In Gwinnett County, in Fulton County. They had plantations in all these places at one point. And these baskets were woven by the enslaved to put the cotton in to carry the cotton. And the weaving style, of course, is very West African.
Yeah. And it looks like those babies are also working.
Yes, everybody worked. Everybody worked and everybody suffered tremendously in those cotton fields. These
Right.
are our cousins. So on this particular vessel, there were 65 that embarked and 51 who disembarked. And as we know, the Dove went to Bassa, right? So it took
Yeah.
65 people. So when they arrived in Savannah, they only had 51 survivors. So 14 died en route.
Hmm.
So we can go to the next slide, Dennis.
And you have first port, second port, third port. What does that mean?
So these are statistics, and if it's blank, that means we don't have the information.
Okay.
So there was no other port. It just was a straight. It's almost like you're looking at an itinerary, right? So they didn't stop anywhere and pick up anybody else.
Okay.
They just went straight from. This one was from Bassa. Went straight from Bassa, straight to Savannah.
Winning.
Yeah, there were no additional ports. So the captives were carried from only one port, right? They embarked and then they arrived at Savannah, Georgia, with 51 people on board.
And do we know how long it typically took from from Bassa to Savannah?
Yes. Let me see if I can find the stats for this particular one. Give me just a moment. So this was the Dove that went from Bassa. And so it arrived with captives on October 1, 1767. This particular one, let's see, duration, October 1st. It doesn't say exactly the date this particular one was picked up. I'll be able to answer the question for a subsequent one. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, this one doesn't have the stats for that because it only has the date of arrival. It doesn't have the exact date of departure, which I would need to calculate. So depending on the time of year and the type of vessel, it didn't always take the same amount of time.
Um,
So some of them have the departure date and the arrival date, therefore you can determine exactly how long it took those particular vessels to arrive, but that one does not have it. You can go ahead and read this. This is a bill of sale basically.
Hmm.
Um, so long cotton and rice Negroes.
So hard to read.
Okay, so yeah, the thing here is I'm doing this to demonstrate um hmm,
Hmm.
our people were rice farmers. I can't overemphasize this enough. Some of the reason we were desired was to be taken into these places because we were good at doing something. We were useful. We were productive. And we were removed from the place where we should have been producing and used to produce elsewhere. And the manner in which it was done.
For sale, long cotton and rice Negroes. A gang of 460 Negroes accustomed to the culture of rice and provisions, among whom are a number of good mechanics and house servants, will be sold on the 2nd and 3rd of March next at Savannah by Joseph Bryan. Terms of sale: one-third cash, remitted by bond, bearing interest from day of sale, payable in two equal annual installments to be secured by mortgage on the Negroes and approved personal security, or for approved city acceptance on Savannah or Charleston, purchasers paying for papers.
Yeah, horrible.
Human beings. And we came because and these people were good at cultivating rice.
Yes,
Gotcha.
mostly so. So
Hmm.
they were usually targeted for the seacoast of Georgia because in South Carolina because that's where they had those massive rice farms. So they're working in those swamps on the seacoast in those swampy islands, like Jekyll Island, Tybee Island, all these places we like to vacation today. Hilton Head, Dafuski Island, all these places that we like to take our families and sit on the beach and enjoy the breeze. And we see all the swampy marshes still look like rice fields to this day. When I went there with my children last time, we couldn't get over the eerie feeling because I tell them everything, right? So they knew. They were like, wow, imagine just seeing hundreds of people in those swamps with no shoes, no protective gear, falling away in the heat. Those places are hot. It's
Yeah.
not a joke. This is a sketch of the sale from Savannah. So they would sell people's babies separately from them, especially if the child was no longer nursing. Sometimes they would take the husband and separate him and sell him separately from his wife. That little boy that looks like he's no longer suckling, that would be a good one, a good person for them to sell to as a domestic servant because he's easy to train, to be subservient. I mean, it was horrible,
Yeah.
horrible.
Why are they standing on the table?
Because they need to be seen. It's an auction. You display the goods.
Jesus. There's another ship with 91465 ID. The name is Sally. Owner is William James. Great Britain. That's the flag constructed in
Yeah.
Liverpool in 1768 and registered right there.
This one does show guns mounted, so it had two cannons. When they say guns mounted, they're talking about cannons. So this one they captured how many guns were mounted. They also captured the tonnage of the vessel. The women that are beating the rice in the mortar to make flour. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Two women. It's always two, right? You take turns. One goes down, one comes up. One goes down, one comes up, right? So they
Yeah.
still have that rhythm of two
Hmm.
women pounding the mortar into the pestle. And this is near Savannah, Georgia.
And we can even increase that number. Yes, it takes skill, Carl. Yeah.
What are you calling my new voice? I can't use mortar and pestle. Yeah, so this particular vessel had, this one's from Grand Cape Mount, 409 embarked, 350 disembarked, and captives that were intended to be purchased were actually 300, but they ended up purchasing 409. That's what that means. So the plan for this ship was to purchase 300, but they were able to purchase 409.
Mm.
So they lost 59 and didn't care because they still profited with 300. They
Yeah.
have 50 more than what they intended. So sometimes what will happen is the owner will send them for a certain number of people and they will buy some for themselves. Therefore, putting more people at risk because now the vessel's
Yeah.
overcrowded. It's already horrible when they get the intended number. But 59 people died. They didn't care because they still had 50 for themselves, the captain and crew, to sell
And
after delivering what they were sent to pick up. They still had an extra 50 people that they could sell and profit from, besides being paid to go and grab people and purchase people from the people who were selling them on the coast.
how much they pay?
Yeah, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
How much they pay for the people, next little of nothing compared to what they received when they arrived on the other end. It's a family in Georgia on a plantation. Look at the chimney. You see the mud chimney. Very, so we don't have chimneys here, but the style of using thatch and putting mud on it or sticks and putting mud in between to fix the chimney is very African.
Yeah.
You know, the way we would have done it with a whole house, right? But here they still have remnants of that of the architecture style, but it's on the chimney of the house because you know, as you know, Georgia is cold. Certain times of the year they needed heat, and they were forced to do these things themselves, build their own dwellings. Most of the, you know, who's gonna build it for you?
Mm.
You want some place to sleep, you want shelter, build it with the materials that are around the place. So this house has no windows. This is the Voyage 82243, the ship Laurel. The owner is Monk or was Monkhouse Graham, Thomas Hayes, Samuel Newton. So three people owned the ship. This was a joint venture, collaborative business arrangement between three Englishmen. Flag of vessel Great Britain. Place constructed the island of Bermuda. The year was constructed was 1790. It was registered in England, but we don't know where. It wasn't specified. The rig was, it was a brig. So this is the brig Laurel. You want to look up the history of this ship and where else it went. 117 is the tonnage. They have no records of the guns mounted. Next, please. Next slide. So this is another image from Georgia. And some of these images just look so familiar to me. So they have a handheld plow. These are actual photographs of actual enslaved people.
Hmm.
This is not AI generated. This is not a recreation or a reenactment. This is an actual photograph of actual enslaved people in the 1800s. And they're farming.
Handheld plow.
Yeah. So this is voyage number 169. This is the last ship on record that left from Liberia, what became Liberia, and went directly to Savannah. This voyage began at the place of this embarkment in August, on the 13th of August, 1802. The vessel arrived with the captives on the 29th of January, 1803. The vessel departed from the home port on February, for the home port on February the 20th, 1803, and it arrived at the home port on April 20th, 1803. The captain's name, Henry Baldwin Gould. The voyage outset 15. The crew had 3 deaths. So 3 people among the crew, the employees, the workers on the vessel died.
Hmm.
But they started out with 15 and ended up with 12. Let's go to the next slide, please. So more examples of people in Georgia, baskets that looked like they were done by people of Rivercess or,
Yeah.
any of those areas, right? Look at the weaving style. Very, very familiar to
Yeah.
us. There's the same interlock weaving that we do for fishing baskets, right? The fishing trap, the not a fish trap, but the crawfish traps. Except the weaving style now, the crawfish traps are longer and smaller, but look at the interlocking pattern. You'll see those patterns in the Liberia National Museum, the old fishing baskets. It's just, for me, I pay attention to those kind of details. You can tell who people are by the works of their hands. What was passed down to them was also passed down to us.
Hmm.
Common root. Same
The
great
baby,
great grandparents, right?
the baby is also picking cotton.
Babies pick cotton. Little small children. So we'll go back to the vessel. So on at this port, 135. This was a Grand Cape Mountain. Embarked. The total who disembarked was 124, so they lost 11. They had intended to purchase 124, but they purchased 135. Still ended up with the right number.
Hmm. You say, well, some
Like I
gonna
said,
die, so let's get more.
yeah, or maybe we'll get more, some extra survivor. We can sell the extras. That's what they did. Horrible. So this now is from a book called The Chattahoochee Valley Immigrants to Liberia. It shows some of the people where they came from who went back to Liberia. So you had people from Columbus, Georgia, and Ephalua, Ephalua, Ephalula, Alabama. Sorry, I'm not from the South. So a lot of people who were sold at Savannah didn't remain necessarily on in the rice plantations, a lot of them went inland to places like Columbus, I'm sorry, Columbus and Athens and these other areas where they worked in cotton fields. So a lot of the people who went back to Liberia were coming from these areas. People landed at the port of Savannah and ended up in Alabama and these parts of Georgia, Fulton County. Some of them were sold into um, North Georgia. Some of them were, a lot of them, Southern Georgia, Northern Florida. But mostly they would remain on the coast doing rice. So it says Columbus, Georgia, and you can pronounce that. That is Effalufa, Alabama, Effalula, yeah, Alabama. Um, these are two towns that are located on the Chattahoochee River. When I first moved to Georgia, I lived literally a stone's throw from the Chattahoochee River. Um, and this was the river also is a border between Alabama and Georgia, were points of origin for 486 of the former enslaved who departed from for Liberia in the year 1867 and 1868. So you had just in that 12, actually less than 12-month period, you had two ships that carried 486 people back just from these two areas, these two cotton fields. Some of those people are descendants of people who came from there as well. And some of the people who descended of those people had only been in Georgia for a couple of generations. We're talking about grandparents came when they were young adults or teenagers. And now they could go back. So you're talking about people who in some cases were just 2 generations removed. And I'll tell you something. My children are 2 generations removed from Liberia. So they know that I'm Liberian. They know their grandparents were born in Liberia. They know I was not, but they know I'm very Liberian. So they knew who they were.
Yeah.
You have incidences of people who went back to Liberia that say, hey, my grandmother was Gola. I don't want to live anywhere but among the Gola people. So we had people who were going to Liberia that even knew their ethnicity.
Yeah. Those stories were passed down, so they knew.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And when they
Especially
got,
in cases where they were not separated by force from their families.
yeah, I
Where
wonder
they
when
were
they
able
get
to know
back.
their own grandparents and then they would hear the stories, they would be able to pass it down. But whenever there was forcible extraction of children, it would cut the lineage, the
Yeah.
storyline of their ancestry. They wouldn't even know who their grandparents were or anything because the way that they were resold or taken away from their families
Yeah,
at very young ages too.
and that's the kind of theme this novel Beloved addresses, right? How
Yes,
families were separated like that.
yes, horrible. So this is an example of one of the plantation for the Bass family plantation in Georgia. So they built their own houses with wood and other mud and other materials. So this is the Bass family plantation on the fortress where the enslaved people lived in Georgia. And it was conveniently right on the cotton fields. If you look behind there, those are cotton fields. So you didn't have to commute to work. You just wake up when you're about to drop. Now you go, you get in bed, you sleep, you wake up before the roosters crow, and you go back at it again.
Hmm.
And
You
my
do.
understanding is after picking cotton and hauling it back, they didn't have strength in them to do anything else or get small things to eat and go to sleep. This is not a joke. Children died working in those plantation fields.
Yeah.
It's when I read some of I try to leave a lot of the graphic details out of the presentations because I just want people to understand the migration patterns and things like that. But children died working in plantations to enrich other people.
And by the time, so people were on this plantation, grew old, died. Their children continue working there, die.
Mhm.
And at a time, maybe by the third, fourth generation, now you elaborate and they say, hey, go back to Liberia where you came from.
Yeah, and then you go there like Tubman's grandfather and get killed because you were upset that somebody was doing sassy wood. So I mean, and the sorrowful thing is the casualties, the number of people who died.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. And trust me, I don't think it's funny. I'm a person who does what's called nervous laughter. So that we laugh to keep from crying.
Hmm.
Yeah. So this I thought was interesting. I really look at details of things and so I see things differently. And there's one is a slave um, chain of people being marched to the coast, carrying loads of things. So the traders will sell the human beings, they will also sell goods. And they will force the slaves to carry the goods. Then they will sell the goods and the human beings. So if they were trading, any kind of thing like rice, they would haul all of it on their heads because these ships wanted rice because it was dry and they could cook it, right? So
Yeah.
bring the rice, bring the human beings, you sell all, you make a lovely profit. So here it depicts a fall of a Fulani man marching some people to the coast to be sold. And the other picture is from southern Georgia. And it is a group of people who have picked the bales of cotton for the day and they're marching them back from the cotton fields.
People made tons of
Similar,
profit from cotton.
yes.
Well, if you were watching, this is the Liberia History Channel. If you want to join and talk to us about what you've heard so far, call 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 #. So call that number. I will pick up the call and then you can join the conversation. So again, the topic from the Green Coast to Georgia and back. We're talking about 12 ships from the Green Coast to Georgia. And this took 36 years. And the piece that we always want to remind you of, which we learned a lot in Liberia, is people coming back from the United States back to Liberia as free slaves. The
Right.
piece that we have not covered sufficiently in Liberia is people leaving what is today Liberia, those borders being shipped to places like Savannah or Barbados as slaves. And Carl, you talk about 12 ships came with slaves, 6 went back with.
Yes.
And I wonder when they got there, whether people actually knew, or was it something that was discussed that some of these people came from here?
So we do have incidents, like I said, of Liberians returning. One particular woman returning from Georgia who said she was Gola or Gullah. She said, "My grandmother, this is where she came from. That's where I want to settle." So you do have incidents of that, of people knowing exactly where they came from. I mean, you had the founder of the Barbados Colonization Society, Mr. Barclay, who was the father of Arthur Barclay and the grandfather of Edwin Barclay. He knew exactly where his people were from. He knew they were from Dahomey, which is modern day Benin. So people knew where they came from, especially those who were not too far removed. EJ Roy knew where he came from. Many people knew exactly where they came from. So we talked about people who were enslaved and still even knew some of their dialect because they were enslaved as children and were to go back and still speak some of their dialect because they were emancipated as adults and hadn't completely forgotten the language. So people knew where they were from. Not always, but sometimes people still either remembered and passed it down to their children or they themselves were enslaved as children and knew where they came from.
Let's take some comments now.
Okay.
Uh, Dr. Pajivo just woke up. He said, even though I'm sleepy, but I want to get a bite. Uh, we'll talk about the Tubman from Ellis is asking were they related to Harriet Tubman, meaning your President William V.S. Tubman. Uh,
No. So William V.S. Tubman, what this is, so these names are not a family name. I mean, they're not their, those people's names were from the Tubman plantation. So Tubman's grandfather and and also the Cummings were all returned on the same ship to Maryland. So there's a bunch of Cummingses listed on that ship and a bunch of Tubmans listed on that ship, and they only picked up those names when they were leaving. So they're from the owner of the plantation. If you go back and watch the first episode of the President Tubman documentary, it talks about that very clearly. And no, there's no relationship that I'm aware of between Harriet Tubman and President William V.S. Tubman. Or many of the Tubmans who were on the ship were also not biologically related. They were
so
just,
it was the slave master's name,
yes.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
Education is so important, says Dr. Edison Pajibo. The slavers recorded some of their exploits, but those who sold the slaves in Africa had no records.
No surviving records.
Okay.
But we wrote also, and we kept records. But we don't have surviving records. This is a difference.
He continues, it is still mind-boggling is the fact that in some African countries, especially Ghana, the relics of the slave trade, such as forts and castles, still exist. For Liberia, are there any traces?
So if you go back and watch episodes about Joseph J. D. Roberts and stuff about the slave trade, we didn't have British building massive forts. The slave traders on our coast were a mixture of British, Portuguese, and Africans, mostly British and Africans. The Portuguese didn't really live on our coast the way the British did, towards the documented period of slave trade. So Providence Islands, Trade Town, everywhere along the coast that you see a city, especially those that are at river that have rivers, Sestos, Sasstown, Harper. These were all ports where human beings were held in captivity. And when Roberts, the largest of all was in Galenas, which used to be part of Liberia. When Roberts conquered Pedro Blanco and they used cannon fire and destroyed Galenas. There's still remnants there. And I'm sure if we do any type of archaeological work at Providence Island, we'll see much evidence. One of the things I do know, they had some kind of makeshift archaeological dig at Providence Island, and they were finding a lot of remnants that were obviously from the slave trade. And these people didn't know enough of the history. Archaeologists have to know history. And they didn't know enough history about Providence Island. They thought that Providence Island was just like some kind of empty place, and then the repatriated African Americans. In fact, they said they were finding remnants from the ship Elizabeth, which we all know never landed there. They were finding, the people that came on the ship Elizabeth, they left this Providence Island. It was such a joke. And the Elizabeth never went to Providence Island. And what they were finding were artifacts from the slave trade. But because of the ignorance of the history, they didn't know what they were looking at. And they were not even, it was even their scope of imagination that these things that we're finding were evidence of the torture and the horror that happened at Providence Island before people were settled there. The ACS settled people there. They didn't know. Yeah. So I was like, I've never seen, I mean, it's almost everything we do in Liberia is just, why do we do things in that manner? How you do archaeological digging, you don't know the history. Now, how will you know what you're looking at? How do you know what to even look for if you don't know the history? It was weird. And I was sitting there, watching this documentary, screaming on my screen like you not screaming literally, but I was saying, "Oh my God, how can you guys say this? This is so crazy." And you had the lady said, "Oh, you know where the ship Elizabeth landed here at Providence Island." It was so ridiculous. I said, "Oh my God, people's children are watching this. People's children are watching this, and they think this is true."
Right. I
So
mean,
we
the
do
first
everything in
time,
this kind of way.
the history that I know, the first time we heard the name Providence Island was when people arrived there, to negotiate for land, right?
Right.
But prior to that, which I learned on the History Channel, these were all slaves camps where that guy and his parents sold slaves right there.
His father, yes. And the thing is, John S. Mill was half British, half African. And John S. Mill was the one that said, "Hey, you all can settle here at Providence Island. We still have some huts or houses that we had here that we used to keep enslaved people in." And that's where they first slept, was in the same dungeon mud houses that the enslaved people were kept in. Because you couldn't get to Providence Island except by canoe. There was no bridge at that time, right? So
Hmm.
it was a very convenient place to hold enslaved people. And the same canoes will carry them out to the ships. So they're seeing remnants of this, and they're thinking that they're seeing, remnants of the of the ship Elizabeth captives. It was just, I suggest if you read any book on Liberian history, that's reasonable. It's clear that Elizabeth didn't go there.
Yeah.
I mean, even some of the worst books written about Liberian history that are skewed and extremely racist, they still are very clear that Elizabeth didn't go there.
Aime Julata Cassell, this is touching and reveals a whole lot of whys. Uh, and it's impagible. And for those who had the experience of cotton and sugarcane farming in southern United States, how come when their descendants return to Liberia, we don't have the cotton and sugarcane industry thriving?
We did. And Mr. Dr. Patribo, you watch the History Channel. So we talk about the merchants, the great merchants of Liberia. We not only had cotton plantations, we also had cotton mills. And there was an industrious, a pre-industrial revolution happening that was thwarted, of course. There was sabotage, but we had sugar. We were producing sugar. We were producing not only just picking cotton, but we were processing it. And so there's discussions of there's an episode that Jabari did about the merchants of Cape Elizabeth. So go back through the library of our videos and we talk about that that success story. The entire St. Paul River district was extremely productive in coffee, cotton, sugarcane. And also Maryland had plantations as well. Bassa had plantations, Greenville in Sino, where Dennis is from Sino, that whole area. So there were a lot of productive farm, producing tycoons, really. A lot of people made their wealth off of agriculture. A lot of wealthy African Americans went back to Liberia and invested in agriculture.
Yeah.
June Moore and others.
And
And
prior to
most of
that,
them became representatives and senators, hence why they had agriculture breaks. Because
yeah,
they had to go, they didn't make much money from being senators and representatives. They didn't really, most of them were just getting little stipends. So their money was coming from their farms. So they put that farming thing in front of even their legislative work. And the reason they were on the legislature, the reason they ran for office was to protect their economic interests. Make sure that the laws and tariffs and taxation rules were not going to be detrimental to them. So what did they do? Agriculture was built into the law. They had to be able to leave to go back to harvest and make their money. They were not being paid even a fraction of the median income from sitting on the legislature. They were doing it so that they could control the economic growth and development of the country. But their source of revenue, their source of income came from farming. So
yeah.
hence the agricultural breaks. Now we got
And
people taking agricultural breaks just
to go
because.
to the mall of Georgia and
And
shopping.
they're not being productive. They're taking their money straight from the taxpayers instead of paying into the taxes. And they take agricultural breaks. They come to America or go to Europe and buy designer, gaudy designer clothes and
Or
shoes.
they go to Dubai and sing somebody. Uh,
Amen. Amen. It's not a
so,
political show, that
yeah.
is.
No,
But history
agricultural
is
breaks,
political.
that's important. But now agricultural break, go to Dubai and you sing somebody's song gonna find me someday.
Lord.
If you will still watch, we still can call. The number is still on the screen there. But let me announce tomorrow at 7 p.m. We're going to be having our show, Hello Pastor. This is where we discuss questions on the Bible and everything in between. Tomorrow, our topic will be tithes and offerings with Reverend Dr. Suku R. Chia. Join me, the host, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Sunday for Hello Pastor. You don't want to miss that. Well, we don't have a caller here, so we can wrap it up. And we're on time. We're doing good with the time. It's just 3 minutes,
All right.
103. So, talk briefly about, so we know we talk a lot about to Savannah.
Yes.
Talk briefly about going back from Savannah to present day Liberia. What precipitated that?
So Georgia had laws against free African people. They passed laws against free Black people being allowed to remain in the States. So you had to leave upon your emancipation and go to a state that allowed free Black people to be there, or you'd be put back into slavery. So your emancipation came with the condition of your exile from Georgia. So you were only welcome in Georgia if you were the property of someone else. This is before, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation. Liberia is older than the Emancipation Proclamation. So many people who had the ability or the opportunity to completely leave the United States did and went to Liberia. And some people didn't have a choice. Some people were emancipated upon the condition that they left the United States. You can have your freedom. You don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here. And this wasn't just Georgia, this was a lot of southern states. So many people, a condition of their emancipation was an exodus to Liberia because the Black freemen served as an inspiration to enslave people, that there was hope.
Everything that's powerful. Liberia is older than the Emancipation Proclamation. Huda giving you some job here. He said, do you intend to conduct any independent archaeological study to find remnants?
Who is he asking that? Who are you asking? Alola archaeologists. Y'all are a full problem on people. You're talking about a science that is conducted. Archaeologists are PhD holders. These are not. This is not some joke. And so I don't even think the people who did the dig at Providence Island were real archaeologists because it was really unscientific. And it wasn't even an academic exercise. It was such a exercise or an exhibition of buffoonery. So we would like to see actual scientists, actual scholars do an archaeological dig. I don't know what the problem was, who sponsored what occurred there, but it was, and please quote me, take snippets of my voice and play it around. It was a joke. And Liberia deserves more we deserve respect. Our history deserves respect. And, coming and doing things halfway and getting, it's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable. We have to do things correctly or we shouldn't do it at all. You know, but yeah, I like that question. I hope you weren't posing it to me. I hope you were just throwing it out there for people who are watching. I don't think we have any archaeologists in Liberia, but not any doctorate degree holding archaeologists, but we could partner with a university Maybe
Right.
some students are doing PhD research, and we could have them come and research some of those places that Roberts destroyed and the cities were built on top of them, including King Peter's Town, Bytown, Trade Town, which is now Edina, Robertsport, all of these places.
Thank you. Well, mm, that will do it. Let's get your closing call.
So I want to tell everybody thanks for following. Next week, we can continue on this line, or if you'd like to see us discuss something else, please reach out to Focus on Liberia, Dennis Chow, or myself, and we would be glad to. Um, this is a labor of love, I guess we would call it, because this is something I do, and all I do is come on here to share what I've learned and discovered and give you all the sources so you can do your own discovery. Hopefully, this inspires young people to want to study history or archaeology or anthropology or all the related fields, linguistics that help inform our understanding of the past. And that understanding of the past will help us understand the present and therefore know the direction to go in the future. Thanks so much for watching as usual.
Call, sorry, I have a question here. I know you mentioned it before, but Evans is asking this. He said, "Do you think the Gulagichi are related to the Gula and Kisi people of Liberia, who are known for their rice cultivation?" We've said this several times here.
So I've had, we have said it several times. There are so many things that are so obvious. There's even linguistic similarities. The songs you see, you hear Vai and Gisi in Gullah Geechee singing, and you hear Gola Geechee Vai words, Mel words also. So because a lot of people didn't know about the Gola people, they would always think that Gullah was about Angola. No, it didn't say Angola. It's Gullah. It doesn't mean that nobody went there from other places, but a huge percentage of people who went to South Carolina, Charleston, came from our coast and the coast of Sierra Leone. So we know that a Kisi and a Gola are closely related there, and many of them ended up there. And Gola, Gisi, Gullah, Geechee is the same thing. Because we don't really say Kisi, right? It's spelling it with a K, but it's actually Gisi. When you hear the
Yeah.
people talking, they say Gisi. And so when you go to the the east coast of southern United States, you hear Gishi, Gichi, Gisi. It's the same thing. And when you hear the Gullah people, Gola, they don't say Gola, they say Gullah, Agola. It's the same thing. It's very blatant.
There you have it. And
Now I have a show topic for next week. We're going to talk about, since we have a Gola first lady and a Gullah first lady and a Geechee president, we are going to talk about a Gullah Geechee Liberia connection next week.
join
Gosh, so
us.
that thanks, Elvis. You gave me a great idea because that's something I've been looking into anyway. So I'll just share you. I'll share what I have. It's pretty amazing. And in fact, Dennis, did we do that show already?
No, no show on
You
Gulagi
sure?
here.
We didn't? Okay, so we'll do it.
No.
Because I've been looking at that connection for a long time. Since we didn't do it, we'll do it next week. Next week at a Gullah Geechee. In fact, I will bring Jabari on with me because he's a Gullah Geechee man from South Carolina. So we'll bring a living Gullah Geechee descendant.
And, and Francis say I have to send you a video of a young Gula girl dancing. So we may have some Gulagichi song right here or next week. Please join us.
And
Well,
yes, of course.
thank
We'll
you,
talk
Carl.
about Yakumba. Yakumba. What is it? Kumbaya is Yakumba. We'll talk about all of that next week.
Oh, wow. So please join us next week. That's a Saturday. This Saturday and every Saturday at 8 p.m. Join us right here for the Liberia History Channel. And always invite someone and share the show. I want to thank you, Carl. Thanks to our viewers, those who watching now and those who will watch later. We will now conclude by playing the song that says, "We are all Liberians." What are you, Agola Kichi? We are all Liberians. Have a good night and God bless you.
Thanks, everybody.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home.